estará chilando.
Tenemos que meter a otra persona.
Sí, perdonad. Nos había cancelado, pero nos ha... Perdona, ¿eh? Yo tampoco contaba con ella, si te sirve de consuelo. Aquí dejamos a Álvaro Lario. Ah, no, una cosa, como Álvaro se tiene que ir...
pero vueltas porque tienen cerrado.
Cuidado con este pabellón.
Sí.
Okay, colleagues, friends, good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the Spanish Pavilion for this first event that we organize here. We're very grateful to our colleagues at the Ministry of Ecological Transition for putting together this pavilion and sharing this small space with the Spanish Development Cooperation, the Spanish Development Agency. We want to be at COP because we think the planet and climate action is at the core of our priorities at development cooperation. This COP is taking place in a backdrop of global crisis, of course the climate crisis, many others, but we should not lose focus of that ultimate interconnected web of different crises. We're just coming from a pandemic, there is global health, there is climate, there is poverty, there is inequality, gender gaps. The implementation of the SDGs is not proceeding as we would hope it to proceed. And it is very important that this is a COP of stock taking on the one hand, to see, and that's one of the major objectives of the meetings these days, is to see where we stand, the progress we have achieved. And there are some positive signs. Yesterday we all received with a lot of optimism the announcement of a loss and damage financing facility, which for those of us that work on the humanitarian front is of course very important. Only last year in Spain, we responded to floodings, for instance, in Libya and in Pakistan that were, I don't know if fully preventable, but certainly fully anticipated, could have been anticipated. And I think these financing facilities, of course, is a long-standing demand of our friends in the Global South. And we think it is, of course, very important and completes the architecture, the financing architecture on climate matters. So this is a COP of stock taking. We are also, and we are a responsible donor, we are all committed to the 10 billion target on financing, climate financing for developing and emerging economies. We are still falling short, and that's of course regrettable, but the indications point to the fact that this year we could perhaps meet this target and of course start defining a target for the future. But this is also a COP not just of stock taking, it's a COP of action. And I think a common denominator among the people that are in this panel, the different friends that we invited to join us today, is that we are in action. We, of course, work on political declarations, but we work on a daily basis, each of us in a different capacity, on climate action and priorities related to that. So there is, of course, political will that needs to be put on the next steps on this COP, but there are two fundamental aspects on action that are important. One, of course, is partnerships. We know that each of us alone is too small to tackle the challenges that we have ahead of us. I gave you the figures of climate financing worldwide. The needs are, of course, enormous. We also have indications that funding for global adaptation, which is, of course, a core priority for our countries, our friends, our partners in the South, is really shrinking compared to an increasing needs. And the other element is, of course, financing. And I think that's where this discussion, in a way, converges. We need to work together because we need to mobilize additional resources. We need to green our ODA, and I'm proud to say that at AECID over the last 3 years, we have tripled the amount of our ODA that counts towards climate financing. We have very ambitious objectives set by our president to increase by 50% starting in 2025 climate financing. And this is, of course, very important because we do not want to give our partners the choice between feeding their people, tackling poverty, tackling all the social challenges, and at the same time protecting the planet. So that is why we talk about a fair transition, and that is why, for instance, in this COP we will be making some announcements regarding the Amazonia, on financing, not just for the preservation of natural resources, but for sustainable development in these areas. So I want to cut this introduction very short. We're starting a bit delayed, and we want to hear from our panelists. All of them are close partners of us. They are, I would say, if they allow me, friends. And we want to hear from them how they see this COP, the opportunities in particular for partnerships and for mobilizing financing. We have with us our first speaker, the president of IFAD, a Spaniard by accident, but someone that is not just committed to the rural poor and to sustainable agricultural systems, but I would say to climate action as well. And IFAD is a close partner of us, not just on rural development and sustainable food systems, but on climate. So Alvaro, Spain is quadrupling its contribution to IFAD's replenishment that you are working on at the moment. We invite everyone here working for a member state to contribute. I think the replenishment is taking place mid-December in Paris. But let us know, could you share with us, how do you see this COP? What's the opportunity, and in particular, what's in the making in IFAD as part of this replenishment to increase your climate ambition?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Indeed, Spain is a great partner with commitments on climate and commitments on rural development. So we very much appreciate the partnership and also the action and the financing, as you said. Probably this COP for us, as you mentioned, it's not about countries having to choose between people and planet, or farmers having to choose between planting or eating. I think it's probably will take stock about the progress, but one of the things that is clear, and we see it on the leaders' declaration that UAE is putting forward on sustainable agriculture, resilient food systems, and climate action, that's just part of the political will. And it's important that nowadays food systems and climate come together. You were mentioning Pakistan. The reality is that Pakistan was the fourth producer in rice in the world. That has meant that a lot of the shocks and floods, 1/3 of the country was wiped out, had a repercussion on rice prices, had a repercussion on wheat. So we can see very much how these extreme weather events are connected. So I think that's why financing is not only about mitigation, it's not only about developed economies, but actually it's mostly about adaptation, and it's about developing economies. And for that, at IFAD, for example, in our replenishment, we're putting together a new instrument, which is called Climate Additional Contributions, just to focus on that link between climate and food systems. For the next cycle, actually for every dollar that we invest in our projects, 40 cents will be just on climate adaptation. All of our climate financing, or the majority, is just going to adaptation, because that's what small-scale farmers need right now. If they want to have a decent livelihood, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who only live out of farming and agriculture, it's fundamental that we support them right now. Let me put you an example. We're working and we will be announcing at COP as part of the action, which is called ARCAFIM, which is jointly with the Green Climate Fund. We also partner a lot with Adaptation Fund, with the Global Environmental Facility. This is a public-private partnership on which actually it's a blended finance mechanism with the private sector and risk sharing, and with a technical facility in Kenya, in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Tanzania, and it will be supporting hundreds of thousands of farmers. So I think we need to make sure that we are catalyzing our money, our taxpayers' money, but also bringing the private sector. And that's very key, because there's enough money on private sector for mitigation, there's enough money for hard infrastructure. What we need to make sure is that all of that also trickles to the people, and especially to the poor people, which usually are in the rural areas, are in developing economies, and most of them are devoted to agriculture. So we very much welcome the leaders' declaration. Now we would like to see more and more catalyzing and mobilizing of financing with Spain, with the climate funds, with some of the partners in the room. And we are very much encouraged, but some, as you said, some of the progress, but we need to see much more. In the case of adaptation, we know, just to finalize, in Glasgow, we committed to a doubling of adaptation from 20 billion to 40 billion by 2025. Mm-hmm. It's just 1 year away, and we're at 21 billion. So clearly on adaptation, we are not there. We had a report this week also on small-scale farming, which on small agribusinesses, which, as I said, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people. They receive 0.8% of the overall climate finance. That's clearly not enough with the people. Once more, hard infrastructure, enough money, hydrogen, big investments. We also need to make sure that those investments go to the people who are currently suffering the most. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. Alvaro needs to leave us because he has the leaders segment with the leaders, including our Prime Minister, so we are going to let him free. Thank you, Alvaro, for joining us today, and we will be talking soon also in December in Paris, hopefully. So from Alvaro and this global picture that he painted, we want to go local, so we have the pleasure to have with us Mayor Chilango Chitangala. She is the mayor of Lusaka in Zambia. We talk about partnerships, we talk about financing. Mayors and local governments are really at the forefront of efforts on climate adaptation, climate mitigation, in particular in Africa, a continent that is experiencing accelerated urbanization. And I think a lot of challenges to fight the climate fight, but also to make sure that this new population coming to cities has services, has social inclusion as well. So, Mayor, would you share with us what it is that you are doing, also with African mayors? You are a close partner of the Spanish Development Cooperation. We are working with your colleagues, for instance, in Maputo and many other African capitals on supporting sustainable development, sustainable environmentally, but also socially. So, pleasure to have you with us, Mayor. Would you share with your views on this COP? What do you expect? What can mayors do? What can African mayors do?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am Chilando Chitangala from the city of Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia, with a population of over 3 million people. Our fights really as African cities, I think they are very, very similar. And what is needed really on mobilizing finances that we feel that we've been left a little bit behind, especially in improving our adaptation measures. For example, in my city, we, at the local authority level, we are the ones that receive the problems directly with the people. But what we've tried to do is we've used our communities to give us information of what they really need. What my government has done is they've introduced a decentralization policy. So we work with our WDCs, these are the Ward Development Committees, to hear from the people exactly what they need to fight climate change challenges. But again, to fight these climate change challenges, we need financing. Where do we get the finances? It's very important that we work with local communities as well, financial sectors in our cities, so that they can also help, especially those that the companies that are the largest polluters of or contributors of pollution, which are companies that make drinks, water, and so we all have to include them so that we find a common solution. But at the same time, I feel that when our governments are funded, they need to also look at the sub-national government, which is us at the lower level, for them to support us directly. Even other organizations that are supposed to be financing African cities directly, I think it's important that they know that it's important to fund the local government directly, because when you fund national government, they have other priorities. They'll take the funding to what they think are their priorities in health or education, and yet fighting climate change is one of the important issues for us at local level. So for us, I feel that finance needs to also be more accessible and more responsive to our issues at local level. So, and what we found is that most of our, the financiers will ask the African cities that have already got a burden on loans or on financing to pay. They'll issue commercial loans, and they'll make us want to pay more than 10% interest, where the others that are in developing cities, that are the economy is more viable, will pay as little as 5%. So we find that quite unfortunate. I think they must also look at our African cities and also think of us to pay very little interest on these loans. And then at the same time, I think when we are supported by our organization that we work with, for example, like I am with ICLE, that come and support our cities. I think it's important also that they must understand that it's not only supporting us. I think it's important also to build capacity in me and the people that I work with for implementation and monitoring of these projects that we ask for. Because mostly, like in my city, we ask for the people at the lower level, who are the WDCs, the Ward Development Committees, to give us the projects. And whether they are small or large projects, I think they are very important. So they still need to support us so that we make sure that the implementation is done, and then the monitoring, and also build capacity in ourselves. I think building capacity in ourselves is very, very important at this level. And then also at the same time, we also use, the reason why we use a bottom-up approach is because we want all the projects that are being supported to be tailored to the needs of our people in our communities. And also, I think as we sit here, all those people that want to help us with supporting the African cities, I think it's very important that you also look into just supporting us directly at subnational level. I think that's very important, and I think even in the last COP, we talked about supporting subnational governments at local level, but we've been talking about it. It's been 12 months now, and the answer is not there. So I hope that this COP we will find a solution so that we are supported. There are so many measures that we're putting in place. For example, in my city, just to help us with mitigation and adaptation, we also have, like with my office, we have what we call plant a tree with a mayor. So we have to make sure that the city must plant trees, and every tree that is cut down, 5 more trees must be planted, and then also making sure that our waste management system is working, because from my city, Lusaka, we have a very big challenge with waste management. So that is one of the biggest problems. And then, of course, coming from a city where 70% is unplanned, it's a problem, because then we don't have a good drainage system. So right now, working with many other partners and support with organizations that we subscribe to, I think they need to look at some of these challenges that our African cities are facing. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you very much for reminding us that there are projects big and small, and the importance of community engagement and the role that you play. Also channeling funds, and I think some of the challenge is not just about mobilizing financing, but making sure that that financing goes to projects. And when we talk, for instance, climate adaptation in the Global South, that often involves small-scale projects that big IFIs and big infrastructure projects cannot tackle. So on this matter, I'll turn the floor now to Miko. He's the head of the Adaptation Fund. Is as you know, the global instrument to channel funds to adaptation priorities. That's another big priority of our multilateral engagement at AECID, at the Spanish cooperation. This year we're contributing 20 million to the Adaptation Fund. So, Miko, how do you see the challenges of financing adaptation? I think Alvaro mentioned we're still at 21 billion, falling short of the 40 billion promise. What do you expect from this COP? How do you see things from the Adaptation Fund?
Well, thank you, Anton. Thank you for the kind invitation to join this important event. And I'd like to share the perspective of the Adaptation Fund in channeling funding and addressing this challenge of inadequate funding for adaptation. It was just a few weeks ago, UNEP published the Adaptation Gap report that showed that the adaptation finance gap, which is between available funding and the finance needs for adaptation, is about 10 to 18 times. So the gap is growing. It's 50% higher than it was assessed to be last year, which is very, very worrying news. Despite the urgent need to accelerate and scale up public adaptation finance to developing countries, in fact, adaptation finance has been plateauing or even dropping in the recent years. We are one of the instruments that's helping developing countries in adaptation. We've been working on this for 15 years. We have financed more than 160 projects around the world, and that number is growing. And we're very, very grateful for the continuing support of the government of Spain, including the recent pledge by President Sanchez just 2 months ago. The bridging the adaptation finance gap doesn't only require increasing international public finance, even though that's important as well, but also taking into account the available domestic and private finance for adaptation, and possibly the reform of the global financial architecture in the bigger picture, and better international cooperation. Therefore, the topic of mobilizing climate finance is really crucial for the Adaptation Fund, and we've been considering this carefully in our recent adjustments to our strategy. We just started implementing our new strategy that builds on our important mandate of supporting the most vulnerable communities in developing countries with grant-based financing. Private sector financing is very important, but often it's not available in the most vulnerable communities, and we need to still increase the public sector grant-based financing, and that's what we are doing as the Adaptation Fund to meet the needs of the local communities, the needs of ecosystems and the broader societies. We are quite an nimble organization in that our processes are simple and it's easy for countries to access them, and we build a lot. I was having a discussion with Agustin just now about the importance of working with local level organizations, and locally led adaptation is one of the cross-cutting features. We really need to, as Mayor mentioned just now, we need to build the capacity of local organizations, but we also know that takes time to build in that capacity of the local organizations, while at the same time they have urgent needs. So I often say that we are running a sprint and a marathon at the same time. We need to deliver adaptation finance quickly, but we also need to build in the longer-term sustainability of those communities and the financing mechanisms. So let me stop here, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Mikko. And again, you mentioned the importance of building a solid pipeline of projects, and the mayor mentioned also capacity building. There is the question of the funding gap, and even Spain has committed, as you may know, to a new law on development cooperation, sustainable and global solidarity, that is committing ourselves to 0.7% of our gross national income to ODA. Climate action, and in particular adaptation and the priorities, as I said, from the perspective of emerging and developing economies being a key target, because there needs to be no trade-off between planet and people, as we said, and we need to make sure that our partners do not face that trade-off. But even if we achieve that target, and we have doubled, for instance, the budget of our agency over the last 2 years, we are really strongly committed to this, not just as a matter of solidarity, but responsibility in the world we live in, and the necessity really we all have to lean on one another and tackle these global challenges. But even if all countries among donors in the OECD DAC were to commit to 0.7 and deliver on it, we would be talking about $400 billion, while the needs for sustainable development as a whole is $4 trillion, and I'm not even counting climate finance on a yearly basis. That's the gap we have for the SDGs. We need the private sector and we need the financial markets. That's very clear, and that's why in Spain, in the Spanish cooperation, we have heavily invested, no pun intended, on impact investment actually, and on partnering with the private sector, and that's what we wanted to have with us. The CEO of Gawa Capital, Agustin Vitorica, he is a close partner of us because we are investing in we have invested in a first fund that they launched called Uruma, which is a best practice worldwide, I think, in channeling finance for small producers, in particular in the agricultural sector. They are now working on a very promising fund called Quali, and I wanted to give the floor to him to tell us about Quali, and also more generally to tell us how we can better leverage the financial markets, the private sector, to make sure that we are all aligned and funding these very valuable projects that, as the mayor said, can make a difference on the ground in places from Lusaka to the dry corridor in Central America, or Pakistan, as we mentioned before. Agustin.
Thanks very much, Anton, for inviting me to this panel, and especially for putting up a picture in the announcement of the panel where I had some hair, which I lost almost completely trying to mobilize private investments towards emerging markets, including vulnerable communities and smallholder farmers in particular. So as Miko said, the funding gap is tremendous. The other day I was reading that we are going to need a total of $240 trillion to reach a just transition in emerging markets. For those of you who know about numbers, that implies that we need to mobilize approximately 60% of current financial assets in the world to reach our just transition. So this cannot be done by public investors. This has to be done from private investors, especially institutional investors, that are the ones that really have the money enough to reach the just transition. But what are the barriers? The barriers are several, but first is risk perception. There is a high risk perception today related with emerging markets, starting with emerging markets in any sector of investment. Today, with risk-free interest rates in Europe exceeding 4%, who wants to invest in emerging markets? I mean, so that's our first trouble. Investors don't want to hear anything about emerging markets today. Second, if you want to go to the small companies and to the smallholder farmers in these emerging markets, there is a high perception of risk around them as well. And this is a perception, the international perception, that vulnerable communities will not be able to deliver. And then there is a local perception as well of risk from the local financial institutions that do have the capillarity to reach these communities, but they don't want to work with them because they think the risk is too high to bear. So to solve this, one of the proven tools, at least in our experience, is blended finance. In our fund, in cooperation with AESIT, Uruma Fund, which was, and you can Google Uruma case study, and it will take you to an OECD case study of how to mobilize money towards smallholder farmers. In Uruma, thanks to the de-risking tranche, which was a first loss tranche provided by the European Commission, and a return enhancement tranche provided by the Spanish Development Agency, we were able to mobilize 90 million euros of private investors during the pandemic in just 9 months, 7 of them in the middle of the pandemic, including the lockdown. And this investment came from institutional investors, such as Allianz Investment Management, some pension funds, and other institutional investors. Why? Because there was this first loss tranche that guaranteed a return in their hands in case things go wrong. And there was this return enhancement tranche that increased the return of private investors to take it to what is called a risk-adjusted market return. So this was incredibly important. Now that this fund is reaching and has transformed the lives of approximately 100,000 smallholder farmers in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, now the biggest risk for these farmers is climate events. It's already a scientific evidence that 95% of smallholder farmers are losing agriculture yield year by year as a result of climate events. So how can we really put in the hands of these vulnerable communities the solutions? You need really to have the capillarity and the network to work with these vulnerable solutions, to these vulnerable communities. So for us, we think that money is not enough. We need technical assistance money. Mm-hmm. And for technical assistance money, we need local partners. In Uruma, we are implementers of technical assistance, but we cannot implement locally the technical assistance projects. We need NGOs or other local partners that help us implementing these projects at the vulnerable community levels. And then we need transformation to happen in the local ecosystem. If we don't leave a local ecosystem of financial institutions that are ready to continue with the flow of money towards these vulnerable communities, we are doing nothing. Because when we leave our investment, everything will fall down. So we live to transform processes, personnel, and products that really work for these communities. And to know what works for this community, and I was here in Chilango, it's very important to give voice to the community. If you don't do a system practice, which means giving voice to the different stakeholders in the value chain, you are not able to provide a solution that works. It's not us from the first world that comes with a great solution for vulnerable communities. It's about asking the vulnerable communities and other actors in the value chain what are the blocking points, what are the impediments that are not allowing the money to flow to these vulnerable communities. So for this, we always build a theory of change based on system practice, where we come up with a solution that comes from the interviews of the vulnerable communities themselves. And then with that, and with the help of the blended finance, we're able to offer it to institutional investors. And well, so far they have come in. Let's see if in the next fund, Kuali, we find the same interest from institutional investors.
Thank you, Agustin. I'm sure they will. There is already a solid track record, and as you said, I think this is a virtuous cycle of collaboration between public funding, technical assistance, often from the communities themselves, from NGOs, local NGOs, and of course the funding that comes, and that's what we want to ultimately leverage, is the funding from institutional investors, from financial markets, and so on. And it's difficult, as you say. We are also part of a high-level expert group launched by the European Commission on sustainable finance, and we understand that some of these issues, it's not just about funding bankable projects on the ground, but some of the regulatory challenges that some of these institutional investors have when they think about overcoming these obstacles that you said, and the perception of risk in the south and so on. Very interesting. Thank you, Agustin. So I mentioned at the beginning we live in a context of different challenges, and I think it's very difficult to, it's no longer possible to think in a silo approach, thinking climate, planet, health, social equality, and so on. We have this polycrisis going on, but also the solutions need to be cross-cutting. And I think the climate action is a priority for all sectors. And to talk about, in particular, the interlinkage between global health and climate, we have Maria Neira, another Spaniard, but also a strong voice for health and climate worldwide. Maria is working on a very interesting program called Attach that we are supporting. Spain, I see, is committed not only to climate action, but also to global health, and those agendas are more and more interconnected. I mean, the zoonosis that caused the previous pandemic, in a way, can be seen as partly the consequence of the environmental situation we live, and the health risks associated with climate are enormous. No, we are starting to see diseases that were contained in specific areas of the world, spreading worldwide, and so on. And also, of course, the big role of or the green potential that the health sector has. So, Maria, can you tell us about Attach? How do you see this? I was talking to one of the young activists that is also very eager to hear you. She came for you, not for any of us. She was very happy to tell me that this COP is the first COP that has one day devoted to health. And I think it is indeed very important, because those of us that work on health, climate, and so on, we are increasingly overwhelmed with tackling all these priorities, and having the risk of losing the momentum on global health, which we all focused during the pandemic and the post-pandemic, and it seems now we are shifting to food security, energy security, and so on. So how do we keep the momentum on global health? How do we keep a global health architecture with the WHO, which you represent at the core? And how do we build these synergies between climate action and global health?
Thank you, Anton. Gracias. I like it very much what you say about not only maintaining the global health infrastructure and architecture, but what we have been obtaining until now in terms of global health altogether, and has not been an easy effort. It has been a difficult one. This is the first COP where finally we managed to have a health aid. And why is this important? Because finally we will be putting the real argument that maybe will be the one giving the real sense of urgency. I mean, if something that will concentrate all the attention and create a consensus is the fact that health is the interest of everyone. So maybe our argument is that if we put the health argument at the center of the negotiations here, and the negotiators realize that they are not just negotiating the percentages of the emissions, but they are negotiating with our lives and with our diseases, and that has an enormous cost as well. That will be the sense of urgency that we are all losing until now. Allow me to use a similar, as I am a medical doctor by training. You know that we normally do a diagnosis, and once we have the diagnosis, we go for some prescriptions. So the diagnosis is already there. You say it. I mean, the climate change is affecting our health in a very negative way, whether it's spreading infectious diseases, whether it's through food and water shortages, whether we will have more prevalence of malaria and vector-borne diseases, whether it's heat waves in cities like yours, but in cities, in European cities as well, whether it's about pollution, the fact that we are breathing a toxic air everywhere. So the diagnostic is there. It's definitely affecting our health. Let's move immediately to the solutions, to the prescriptions. The good thing on the prescription is that one of them is about common sense, no regrets investment. So for all of you who are looking at investments, and thanks the Adaptation Fund, because on health we need you very much, we are proposing investments that are the non-regrets. I mean, something that is reinforcing our capacity to do vector control, epidemiological surveillance, early warning systems, working at the urban level on the way we manage waste, water shortages, how we prepare the population. Some cities in Europe, they will need to do some mapping for the most vulnerable and creating climate refuge. We need to move on so many fronts. But the good thing is that on adaptation, we know very well what we need to do. I mean, the health sector is already paying an incredible price. Actually, our lungs are the ones paying it, among other parts of our body, and we need to prepare the health systems to be the one responding to those challenges. That's why we have created Attach, because we need some strategic alignment as well. The last thing we need now, when we have limited resources, as you all said, is going in different directions and not being cost effective. So Attach is the way to be cost effective on all of our interventions, making sure that we will have an operational framework. What do we mean by adaptation and climate resilient health systems? We have defined that very well. We want this knowledge to be shared by all the countries that are part of Attach. And thank you very much, Spain, for investing on launching this critical platform for climate resilient health systems. We want as well to decarbonize the health system. Those medium and high income level countries that are contributing to the carbon footprint, 5% of the global emissions are coming from the health system for obvious reasons, because we need to use energy, but we can decarbonize as well. And that's something, again, through Attach, we can achieve incredible things. And it's very rewarding. The health community is very passionate about, because they see something very tangible. But of course, for the low-income countries, you cannot pretend that they reduce their emissions. First, because they don't have emissions. They are not contributing to the carbon footprint, and they need to gain access to energy, but clean energy. And that's why we want to promote solar panels as well in our healthcare facilities all around the world. Why we don't have in Lusaka all your health hospitals and all your healthcare facilities solar panels? It will be something fantastic. You have renewable energy, cheap technology, so we can start to, in Africa, make sure that this is something that goes in that direction. But at the same time, we need this Attach platform to make sure that the knowledge we are gaining on preparing those health systems to respond to the malaria cases, to dengue cases, on a more strategic way. Because it's not preparing for the different diseases and responding to the different diseases is having the health system that will be prepared to cope with all the consequences, infectious and non-communicable diseases, and water shortages, food shortages, malnutrition, and all of that, as I say, will be a very cost-effective. So our prescription goes in that sense. Of course, our prescriptions needs to go as well for the first mantra as a medical community, which is first, do not harm. And do not harm will be stop giving subsidies to fossil fuels, please, because that is killing us and is filling our hospitals and spending fortunes. I mean, the trillions that are going to subsidies could cover almost 75% of the needs of the universal health coverage. So we need to strategically align, and that's why ATTACH can be the vehicle, and WHO will be very happy to convene all the global health architecture, the different organizations, to make sure that we are cost-effective, strategic, moving in the same direction, and promoting investments that are common sense and no regrets. Who will regret investing on access to water, sanitation, epidemiological surveillance, vector control activities, training for the health professionals, tackling the causes of air pollution? So all of that, you, Mayor, you are a Minister of Health. You know that? You are appointed by now. Because most of the interventions are as well at the urban level, and we need to strategize those interventions as well. So thank you, Anton, for the visionary support to ATTACH. Your support is absolutely critical to go up and make sure that we will lead in that good sense. Thank you.
Gracias, Maria. So we are talking a lot about investment, and there is, of course, investment gap in all sectors, certainly in the health sector, on achieving universal health coverage, also on climate mitigation adaptation. The good news is that the European Union is the largest provider of ODA and the largest provider of sustainable finance. And we have a big institution to do that, which is the EIB, a close partner, again, of ICID, a major mobilizer of funding, sustainable finance, climate finance. Is this the EIB that is leading, and we are participating a new program called the Global Green Bond Initiative worldwide to support the emission of green bonds by emerging economies, eventually by private sector, by corporates as well, making green bonds and green finance an additional way of funding the just climate transition. Thank you for coming as well. It is very important to have the EIB with us here. Milena Mesori. Milena, how do you see things from the EIB? What are the challenges? What do you expect from this COP? Can you tell us about green bonds, other big initiatives that the EIB is committing? Of course, you know, the EIB finances the European economy and is a cornerstone of the Green Deal, the green transition that we are pursuing in Europe, but it's also a financier to the rest of the world. What are your plans, Milena? What do you expect this COP? What do you expect from the EIB?
Thank you, Anton. I hope you can hear me well. So first of all, thank you for having me here on this panel. I think it's very important to also show the efforts that the European Investment Bank, which is the EU climate bank, is making in not only ensuring that we have sufficient capital out there to invest in climate action, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, but also in the other sectors that were mentioned before, like health, for example. So this is what we are focusing on, not just within the EU, but also in our partner countries outside the EU. And without repeating what has been said before, our role is to be part of a partnership, because the solution is in all working together. If we want to multiply the financing that we have available so that we can move from the billions to the trillions that are required for making the necessary investments, and everyone has to contribute with what is it that we can do best. The EIB, as a multilateral bank, what can do best is to make public money available to de-risk investment like what Augustine was mentioning before. And that's how we are de-risking investment, making sure that we can attract private sector and therefore multiply our investment. But not only, also I heard that before, capacity building, technical assistance. We need to have a good pipeline of projects out there that we can finance. So let me go back to what is it that the EIB does when it comes to de-risking. We have put in place a number of initiatives. That dates back to the 2007. First of all, our first issuance of green bond as an institution, but also putting in place investment vehicles where we would be able to multiply by a factor of 20, I would say even, the €1 that we would put of public money. How? By creating, for example, a cushion that will absorb the losses of private sector investors coming into the vehicle. We have done that with GREF, which was the Global Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Facility. That was in the order of 250 million. We multiplied that by 2 with MCAF, another initiative looking at financing funds in climate action. And now what Anton was saying, we are looking at a 3 billion vehicle to buy green bonds issued by low-rated countries so that they can then invest in climate projects. I know that we are very short of time, so let me just leave you with this message. We all need to be part of the partnership. So let's make sure that we come in with what we know how to do best. And the EIB obviously is there to support when it comes to structuring financial vehicle and making sure that our money is well spent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are running short of time. We tackle health and the connection with climate. There is another very dear cause to the Spanish development cooperation, which is feminism. We are a feminist development cooperation, and we think women are certainly part of the solution. There is a message of optimism that many of you have sent about the opportunities that are out there. There is a big opportunity also in the climate transition, in the green transition, which is, of course, the creation of green jobs. We are happy to have with us Suzanne Elregen, who's the regional director for this region, UN Women. I was surprised to read that Arab women have higher rates of STEM studies than women in other parts of the world, and therefore have a big opportunity to benefit from these new green jobs. Can you tell us, Suzanne, about, you see the opportunities, the challenges, of course, because women are first big losers, of course, of climate. I mean, this crisis is not affecting everyone the same way, and we know that women worldwide are most affected by climate change and climate events. What do you think, what do you see the gender perspective of these challenges, and particularly the opportunities? What opportunities are in this big push for the green transition for women, Susan?
Thank you so much. First of all, what a great pleasure it is to be with all of you here today. The Arab states in general is in many ways a region of paradoxes, right? So in the area of climate change, it's one of the regions that is most pressed with heat stress. We are actually fearing a 5 degrees Celsius increase by end of the century. On the other hand, it's the region full of opportunities. Solar energy, for example, is pronounced in this region. Similarly, in the area of gender equality and women in the labor force participation and in the green economy, it's a very interesting paradox there as well. On one hand, as you were saying, very high levels of education, particularly in fields that are critically important for the green economy, such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Actually, the proportion of women graduating from STEM faculties in the Arab states region is higher than any other region. On the other hand, this is the other side of the paradox. We have labor force participation, female labor force participation, that has stagnated around 21% for more than 3 decades. Now, when we have dig deep into why that is, why do we have a very high level of education amongst women, particularly in areas that are critical for the green economy, and on the other hand, very low level of labor force participation, although we know that women would contribute tremendously to this field, we will come back to what many of the panelists have spoken about. It's partnerships. Usually the programs have been very silo-oriented. So either we work on legal amendment alone, or social norms alone, or media alone, or job creation alone. What is needed, of course, is a multidisciplinary model. And this is something that UN Women has been working very deeply on with a number of very different partners, from financial institutions to governments, to NGOs, to private sector. More than 520 private sector companies have signed with us in the past couple of years. What does this exactly mean? It means that we have identified what doesn't work, which is the silo approach, but what does work, and some of the countries have managed to increase women labor force participation in the green economy in this very region, such as some of the countries in the GCC, have done the following. They've embarked on 9 different pillars at the same time. Let me stress the word simultaneously here, because the simultaneous approach is very important. The 9 pillars, in short, are 2 enablers. Without those 2 enablers, we're not going to be able to move an inch. One is the highest level political lead. So you need a head of state, in this region particularly, that owns the agenda of women employment in the green economy and speaks of it repeatedly, and speaks of it in correlation to the national economy and to the green transition, to the just transition. Secondly, you need a sustainable financing. Those are the, let's say, the trains that makes us move very fast in terms of women entering the green economy as part of the labor force. That's legal amendments, social norms, private sector, and finally, mass media communication messages. I'm not going to go into details, but for example, legal laws in the Arab States region, it's about abolishing laws that prohibits women from certain professions. Usually it's construction, and construction is very closely related to, again, for example, building of solar panel fields, etc. So these are the laws that would need to be amended. Then you have 3 amplifiers. Those are the investments, and our colleagues from the European Investment Bank spoke partly of those. Those are then the sectors that you could invest in through the private sector with a high level of profitability and where women are very highly educated and viable for entering that labor market. In the Arab states is the care economy, i.e. preschool care, the green economy, and particularly the investment in solar energy and in climate smart agriculture. And finally, it's the care economy, the green economy, and the final economy is, of course, the STEM economy, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Based on very exciting analysis that UN Women has conducted together with the private sector, if we invest in these 9 pillars simultaneously, then we will be able to ensure around 400,000 jobs in only 3 countries through a profitability lens from now to 2030, and that would be increasing women labor force participation by 5% in the Arab states. Given that we've stagnated at 21% for 3 decades, that 5% is actually quite a tremendous jump, and the vast number of these jobs would actually be in the green economy, and particularly, again, in renewable energy and in climate smart agriculture. So it's a very exciting program, but it heavily relies on the simultaneousness of it. We roll out the 9 pillars at the very same time, and again, that there's strong national commitments to these 9 pillars. Hopefully, we will be able to roll out in 3 countries already in Q1 2024. That would be Egypt, Jordan, Morocco. And the second batch of countries, including 2 countries from the GCC, would be rolled out by Q4 2023. I know I spoke a lot about practicalities. I wanted it to be quite technical and practical, my intervention, and that usually provokes follow-up questions. So I'm going to be here also after the session in case you have any follow-up question or want me to dive deeper into any of those 9 pillars.
Thank you, Susanne. And indeed, I mentioned crises and challenges. Even in gender equality, where we are making slow progress, it will take us 286 years to bridge those legal gaps between men and women all over the world. We ran out of time. We abused the patience of our hosts here at the Spanish Pavilion. I want to give the floor maybe briefly if they want to say, comment, our young climate activists, because they are the ones that are going to be dealing with these problems that we are struggling to tackle on this side of the table. I don't know if you want to say some words. They are giving you a microphone, any of you, both of you?
Okay.
As Suzanne was saying, and she was suggesting, some of us, others are pressed for time, so we really don't have that much time, but some others will stay here in case you want to have a more in-depth discussion. But go ahead, Esther.
I've been said to be very, very quick, so I will be. So I just want to, like, a quick remark. So I'm a Django member, which is the Children and Youth constituency at the UNSCCC, and also I'm a researcher on citizen participation in climate governance. So I was very happy. So not at all the topic of climate finance, but I was very happy to see that the topic of actually the bottom-up approach that the mayor of Lusaka mentioned. So how actually, because I feel that we talk a lot about like financing, about the need that trillions of dollars, of euros that we need, but actually how can we ensure that this money, this funding actually reach the people on the ground, reach the most vulnerable communities, including youth. So yeah, that's like a quick reflection. I was very happy that it was mentioning, but yeah, thank you so much.
So thank you. And on these remarks, like, we need partnerships, we need financing, but we need impact. We need people, reaching people on the ground. And I think with her remarks, I would leave it at here. Thank you, everyone, Mayor, colleagues, for being with us. Thank you, everyone. And there is a wonderful program here at the Spanish Pavilion. Keep on coming. There will be many events throughout this COP. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Your name again?